Welcome to chaomix. Let's take a brief trip down memory lane for just a second. Please tell me I'm not the only one who had that one kid in grade school who swore that running with your arms behind your back actually made you run faster. I mean, I sure as hell believed him, because there had to be some logic behind why Sonic adopted such a unique running style, right? But eventually, 10-year-old me would have his reality shattered when finding out that this wasn't true. Running with your arms behind your back did in fact not make you run faster. Actually, the reason Sonic ran with his arms behind him like that wasn't to make himself faster. His hands streamed behind him like a comet's tail because of his intense speed. Sonic, the epitome of breakneck velocity, became known for his trademark running style. Arms trailing behind, smeared red circles as his shoes cycled back and forth, and streaks of blurred blue sweeping across the ground he ran. Sure, you might see Naruto characters doing something similar with their arms thrown behind their backs, but let's not forget who started this trend in the first place. Sonic was the pioneer, ingraining this iconic pose into the pop culture consciousness, where its impact is still felt to this very day. But funny enough, this pose is hardly ever exactly the same, because the way that Sonic runs differs slightly from game to game. Sometimes for better, sometimes for worse. With so many variations, it got me thinking, which Sonic running animations stand out as the best, and which ones completely fall flat and go down in history as the worst. So join me as we go through practically every single Sonic game and rank each and every one of Sonic's running animations on a tier list. This video is made possible by today's sponsor, Temu. Temu is an online shop with lots of hot items at insanely low prices. They offer so many different things such as electronics, toys, beauty supplies, fashion, home decor, and more. If you like plushies, Temu has a massive amount of options to choose from. Just look at this funny looking guy and tell me you don't want him. They even have retro gaming consoles, something I'm always in the market for. But my favorite thing to browse for has to be the gaming accessories. You know me, I'm a true gamer at heart, so browsing through the massive selection of gaming accessories always brings me immense joy. Especially when you combine it with the low prices, free shipping, and 90-day free return policy. Seriously, you can't go wrong here. Temu is always cycling through huge new deals for hot products. And the huge deal that Temu is offering right now at the time of making this video is their pricing on the Nintendo Switch OLED. Normally, you'd find an OLED Switch for about $350, but with Temu's exclusive offer, you can grab yourself one for $299. And if you click the link in my description, you can get extra coupons that would bring the Nintendo Switch OLED to only $254. That's nearly $100 in savings, so if you're in the market for a Nintendo Switch OLED, I would highly recommend this deal. Huge thank you to Temu for sponsoring today's video, and with all that being said, let's continue with today's episode. Let's go over the criteria I'll be using to rank each running animation. You'd think with the tier list so weird there wouldn't be any rules, but I digress. There are 4 main factors that I'll be looking at when deciding on a ranking. The first one will be posing. This has to do with the visual appeal of the animation. It's how Sonic's running form looks during each phase of acceleration and at top speed. 2. Pacing. Does the speed of the animation align with Sonic's actual movement? And does each phase of the acceleration progress in a natural rhythm? 3. Complexity. Here we examine the layers of animation involved as Sonic's speed increases. Are there distinct build-up animations like a walk, jog, run, and sprint? Or is there just one animation that progressively speeds up as Sonic reaches his max speed? And 4. Game feel. How satisfying does the animation feel during gameplay? Does the animation enhance the gameplay experience solely based on the way it looks? The last criteria is whether or not you're subscribed to my channel. I hear if you are, it's an instant S tier, just saying. So with all of these criteria laid out, let's begin. Sonic 1, 2, and 3 and Knuckles will be the first games we dive into, because their running animations all follow the exact same formula, even though their sprites and art style are slightly different. Sonic's running animation begins with a jog that starts off very slow, but begins gaining speed as Sonic does as well. We then reach Sonic's top speed animation, which, funny enough, has his hands steady at his hips rather than behind his back, and his shoes smear in circles rather than figure eights. The animation progression, despite having just 2 stages, proves that simplicity coupled with good pacing and posing can achieve amazing results. Especially considering the hardware it was on, it does the job well and feels great in motion, and that's what matters the most. There's room for improvement though, which we'll see as we keep going through this list. But for now, this set of animations lands a respectful spot in the B tier. Sonic 2 has another running animation within its special stages, so we'll count this as its own entry. Luckily, it's only one animation, a simple jog that loops throughout the entire special stage. It's It's an interesting perspective since the regular game only has Sonic viewable at a side angle. But here we can see Sonic's back, showing that he does in fact not have a mohawk, despite what the Western box art might tell you. There isn't too much pizzazz here, but the animation has solid pacing and posing. It's pretty average, so I'm gonna put it into the C tier. Sonic 3 also has some special stages with the same over-the-shoulder perspective. In a similar fashion, it's also just a single jogging animation continuously looping. But the bright side is that it progresses in speed depending on how fast you're going, since these special stages gradually speed up as you go on. I gotta be honest, the sprites from Sonic 2's special stages had much better posing. And because these special stages were trying to do this pseudo 3D thing, it's worth noting that I think Sonic 2 also did a better job at making its sprite look more 3D. Overall, it's a downgrade from Sonic 2's special stage animations, and frankly, not even a very good running animation. And it's a shame because Blue Spheres is my favorite special stage from the classics. This one is unfortunately going into the D tier. Sonic CD is the next game on our list that we'll be looking at. This game basically takes the same animations from the original trilogy and throws in a nifty peel-out animation. Signifying an even greater level of speed, the peel-out has Sonic's legs stylized into a red figure-8 streak, and this is the first in-game instance of Sonic throwing his arms back. In short, this running state is absolutely sick and the next step up from the previous animations. Again, besides this, everything else is the same, but this one added phase just so happens to be one of the coolest in the entire series and is just enough to push it into the A tier. Sonic CD also has some special stages we get to talk about, and they're actually really good. Well, not the special stages themselves, I hate these things, but the running animations within them. Sonic has two distinct animations here rather than just the one like in the previous special stages. He's got a jog and then a top speed animation that's essentially an over-the-shoulder perspective of the Sonic 1 top speed animation. There's even turning animations for the jog where he leans into whatever direction he's turning in. Great attention to detail that you love to see. Even though I hate these special stages, these animations are surprisingly really good. So I'm gonna throw this up into the B tier. Shifting gears, let's discuss the 8-bit Sonic games. They attempt to mimic their 16-bit counterparts, but their lower resolution and less powerful hardware keep them from fully achieving this. The animations are faithful to the originals, but the low resolution has the posing take a slight turn for the worse. They're adorable, sure, but I think they could have been stylized a bit differently to fit better with the 8-bit aesthetic, replacing these games into the C tier. Sonic Spinball may be a game where you chuck Sonic around like a pinball, but there are moments where you're on foot. For these sections, there's just a single phase of animation that plays that gradually speeds up as Sonic gets faster. Don't expect much though, because Sonic's top speed is pretty measly here, understandably. It seems that this animation is heavily inspired by the Sonic 2 jogging animation. No hands behind his back or shoes doing circles here. Listen, the one animation it has is pretty decent, but the pacing and game feel are awful due to the lack of speed and it literally just being a pinball game. It is what it is. Let's put this one into the D tier. Sonic Labyrinth is literally a game about not running. No, seriously. Dr. Eggman steals Sonic's shoes and replaces them with shoes that weigh him down, so Sonic is only able to roll. He does have a little 4-frame jogging animation though. It does the job, I guess, but it has zero build-up and the game feel is absolutely terrible because he's so painfully slow. The only plus side is that it's kinda cute, I guess. This one's still going into the D tier. Sonic Blast is truly a sight for sore eyes. This is probably one of the ugliest games I've ever seen in my life, just look at the art style. This game does have 3 sequences of animations until max speed, which is kind of interesting. You got walking, jogging, and then the top speed animation. But my god, the posing is awful, and the pacing of the animation is like nails on a chalkboard, but for your eyes. We're sending this one straight into the Shadow Realm. This is our first F tier. Sega Sonic. Some of you might know that I made this game playable on the Steam Deck with trackpad controls, providing an authentic way to experience the game. So yeah, I'm kinda cool, I guess. The game's running animation is adorably compact and the art style matches this cuteness. There are 3 distinct running phases: walking, jogging, and the top speed animation, which all help indicate your speed, especially helpful given the game's unique trackball controls. It's also worth noting that they designed unique sprites for all 3 phases for all 8 directions. Well, 5 if you don't count the ones they just mirrored. Still, that's a lot of dedication. I'm awarding this one a deserved spot in the A tier. Continuing with the arcade games, let's take a look at Sega Sonic Popcorn Shop. This game surprisingly includes a running animation, as Sonic is chased by Eggman on a conveyor belt. It's, really not good. Probably one of the most clunky looking animations I've ever seen. F tier. One more arcade game, let's talk about Sonic the Fighters. Look, Sonic doesn't really run in this game since it's a fighting game. He does little punches and kicks and slaps his opponent into a pancake. It's a ton of fun, but running is pretty limited here since you're not looping any loops. So judging the running animation feels almost unfair because it's so minimal. Sure, Sonic can jog towards his opponent, but the animation is as basic as a bowl of unsalted popcorn. Serviceable is the best word to describe it, but that's hardly a compliment when it comes to Sonic's iconic running style. It does the job for a fighting game, I guess, if it were like any other character and not Sonic the Hedgehog, so unfortunately this one is going into the D tier. Meme game time. Sonic Schoolhouse on PC has a couple separate running animations, but we'll kind of be grouping them together as if they were different phases. First, we can see the quote-unquote top speed animation at the game's intro logo, where Sonic's shoes blur into a weird fuzzy circle. Amazing. We can then find Sonic jogging towards the camera at the title screen, which is probably one of the clunkiest looking things I've ever seen. As far as I could tell, those were the only instances of Sonic running in this game. But the deed must be done. We must rank it. Please don't crucify me in the comments. I know this is gonna be a hot take, but I'm putting this into the F tier. Sonic 3D Blast is another isometric Sonic game like Sonic Labyrinth, but this time Sonic can actually run. You'd think that would automatically be a good thing, but in this case, it's not. The only slightly interesting thing going for this is that all the animations are rotoscoped from an actual 3D model. It's the one you see in the intro cutscene and the box art for the game. But the game only has a single animation sequence for Sonic's running, with the speed of the animation adjusting depending on how fast Sonic is going. Unfortunately, the posing makes Sonic look like a penguin who's had a bit too much to drink and is holding in a gallon of pee. It's definitely one of the more clumsy animations I've ever seen, despite having a better game feel than Sonic Labyrinth. Because of this, Sonic 3D Blast is being stranded into the D tier along with Sonic Labyrinth. But wait, we aren't done with Sonic 3D Blast just yet. In the Saturn version, there exists a fully 3D low-poly model of Sonic exclusively built for the special stages. Yes, he does have a running animation, and actually, it isn't that bad. He actually has two phases of build-up, a jog and a top speed animation, and I gotta say, for low-poly rig, the posing is actually pretty dang good, even if it is a bit on the stiff side. Also, this is the same model that'll be used in the next two games, so let's put this into the B tier and talk about these next two games using the same model. Sonic Jam is a collection of the original trilogy from the Sega Genesis, ported to the Sega Saturn. So why are we bringing this up if we've already gone over those games? Well, probably the coolest feature of this game in retrospect was the fully 3D hub world you got to explore to view the extra content. This has that same 3D Sonic model from Sonic 3D Blast, but he has some new running animations. Obviously, we gotta talk about it. These animations actually have a lot of things going for them. It actually has 3 entire run phases, a walk, jog, and a top speed animation, and the posing for all of them are surprisingly really good. His top speed animation is especially adorable, which fits the compact look of classic Sonic. But something really cool that this game does is actually stretch back Sonic's quills to represent his speed. Here's the thing though, the speed ain't really all there in this game, making the game feel not the greatest. But all things considered, I'd say this animation is also a solid B tier. Sonic R is the final game to use this model, and its running animation is probably the worst out of the 3. Don't get me wrong, I love this game for all its janky glory, but jank is jank. Again, there's something about the low-poly classic Sonic model that makes anything he does look incredibly adorable. But my god, this dude's running around like he's got no kneecaps. Frankly, the posing isn't very good, and it's just one animation played at various speeds matching Sonic's velocity. I love you with my whole heart, Sonic R, so it pains me to put you into the D tier, but it's gotta be done. This next one is a doozy. Sonic Jam on the Gamecom is regarded by many as the worst Sonic game of all time. Yeah, there's a lot of those according to many people, but I mean, just look at this amazing video game that I'm broadcasting to your eyeballs and tell me to my face that there's a worse one. I dare you. It takes the sprites straight from Sonic 3, so technically the posing and everything is all the same. But the frame rate and whatever else is defective about this game just makes the pacing a total disaster. You could have the best sprite art in the world, but none of that matters when it's being played at a choppy PowerPoint level frame rate and it feels like the game doesn't read your inputs half the time. Needless to say, the game feel is awful, one of the worst Sonic experiences you'll ever have. The fact that this is Sonic 3 sprite art is the only thing it has going for it, so solely because of that, it's going to avoid the F tier and go right above into the D tier. Sonic Adventure, my beloved. And you'll see why in just a second, because the running animation in this game is impeccable. It's got multiple phases with a walk, jog, sprint, and top speed animation, and the posing for each one is amazing. Sonic even turns his head in the direction you're going, a cool little detail I've always appreciated. But dude, this top speed animation is where it's all at. Besides the amazing posing, there's two key ingredients that make this so special, I think. The first one is the onion skin effect, which is basically the slight after image you see on Sonic's shoes. And the second is the stretch you see on the tips of Sonic's shoes, creating the illusion of something like a smear frame, a technique used to indicate intense motion commonly found in cartoons. Both of these effects combined together make Sonic look so incredibly nimble on his feet. And you already know the adventure games control amazing, so when putting this animation to test in game, it's one of the best feeling Sonic games you'll ever play. The running animations from Sonic Adventure are a definite S tier and should be what all Sonic games strive to be. Hey, let's go back to 2D for a second. Sonic Pocket Adventure is a cute little Neo Geo Pocket game made by the people who would eventually go on to become DIMPs and develop the Sonic Advance series. It's interesting to see their work here because we can see how well they pack detail and expression into such a cramped space. This follows the same formula as the original trilogy and 8-bit games. But unlike the 8-bit games, they make do with the low resolution with its art style, which leads to much better posing for all the animations. This game also has an 8-bit version of the Sonic 2 special stages, and looks pretty good all things considered. Sonic Pocket Adventure is just really neat and makes use of every single pixel on screen to convey Sonic's movement to the best of its abilities. Gonna put this in a very respectable B tier. Sonic Shuffle. You'd think a game that reuses the Sonic 1 animations, it'd be right there in S tier with it. But no. Oh, you sweet summer child, no. This game pretty much just takes a few of the animations from Adventure 1 and slaps it in without any of the cool effects. They're also played at a really slow rate, which makes it look like everything is in slow motion. Listen, it's a party game, I'm not expecting it to have the same level of intricacy as everything else. But then again, we're comparing it to some of the best animations in the series, so we do gotta judge it for what it is. The Sonic Adventure 1 animations, but implemented much worse. This one is going into the D tier. Alright, time to talk about Sonic Adventure 2. The adventure games are my favorites for a reason, and the running animations are a great window into seeing why. This game has a whopping 5 distinct running animations: a walk, a jog, a run, a sprint, and a top speed animation. One of my favorite details has to be how Sonic really leans into his turns. It's so natural looking. This paired with the fact that he's got a really great arm pump going and a slight head bob makes it look like he's going absolutely ham and giving it his all. Unfortunately, he doesn't have the same onion skin or smear effect on his shoes, but he does have this really cool wind effect conveyed by these white speed lines when going at certain speeds. Anyways, this game is another amazing yet different take on the Sonic Adventure running animations, and can probably sit up top at the S tier. Remember Sonic Pocket Adventure? Well, those same people would go on to make the Sonic Advance trilogy, known for having some of the most lively and expressive character sprite work ever. I'm not even exaggerating. These sprites were literally some people's entire childhoods. The way they were able to fit all of that detail into such a low resolution character sprite is an absolute miracle. Fun fact, these sprites are actually smaller than the original 16-bit games. Sonic's running animation in Advance 1 is definitely the most bare bones out of the 3 games. He only has 2 running phases, a jog and a top speed animation. Both look pretty great, especially the jog, but I gotta admit, I'm not a huge fan of the top speed animation. He's got his arms back and his chute smeared in a circle, but there's something weird about the positioning of the foot spin. Maybe it's too low or something. Anyways, this isn't my favorite, but it's still very solid. This first Advance game is going into the B tier. Sonic Advance 2 takes what works with Advance 1 and adds on to it. We have a grand total of 5 build-up animations now: a walk, jog, a run, sprint, and a new top speed animation. Like I mentioned with Adventure 2, I love when Sonic has an intense arm pump going, and you get a lot of that here as this is Sonic's main animation for running. But a cool new feature in this game is the boost mode, which is activated when going consistently fast for several seconds uninterrupted. In this mode, Sonic reaches top speed, breaks the sound barrier, and sports an awesome looking afterimage effect trailing behind him. He also throws his arms back and his spike sticks straight out, giving the impression of his immense speed. This replaces the top speed animation from Advance 1 that I didn't like all that much. All of this helps the player feel like this is one of, if not the fastest 2D Sonic game of all time. This is a true S tier if I've ever seen one. Let's talk about another special stage. Sonic Advance 2 has special stages extremely reminiscent of Sonic CD. Once again, there are 2 animations signifying different levels of speed, the jog and the top speed animation. But I gotta admit, compared to the CD sprites, these ones are a bit awkward looking from behind. Sonic also doesn't lean into his turns like he did in CD, which is something I really appreciated and miss now that we don't have it. Despite the Advance series having a ton of intricacy in their sprite art, the special stage animations from Sonic Advance 2 just aren't on that same level of amazing quality as the rest of the game. I'll be placing this one into the C tier. Before we get into the third Advance game, let's briefly talk about a game that came out in between: Sonic Battle. This one, like Sonic the Fighters, doesn't have Sonic going all too fast, since the focus is exclusively on combat. Sonic has a unique jog animation, but other than that, that's all there really is. Obviously, it's a good animation, but there's zero complexity. Understandably, this one's gotta go into the D tier. Now, Sonic Advance 3 changes things yet again. Advance 3 isn't as fast as 2, which is fine, but I think think the change in speed messes up the pacing of the animation slightly. First, the top speed animation doesn't require you to be in boost mode, so you'll often find yourself in this animation when going even mildly fast. This means that the really cool sprinting animation with a vigorous arm pump that you'd often see in Advance 2 is a lot less frequently seen in this game. This messes with the game feel a bit as well, as the max speed animation doesn't feel as rewarding or earned, especially since going into the boost mode doesn't change the running animation now, it just continues the same top speed animation you've already been seeing. This just goes to show again that pacing can really make a difference, even with the same sprites. Still, Advance 3's running animations are a solid A tier. I'm just a bit disappointed it was a downgrade from its predecessor. Let's go ahead and lump these next two games together since they share the same animations: Sonic Heroes and Shadow the Hedgehog. Yeah, Sonic may not be the main character in Shadow the Hedgehog, but he's still in the game and definitely runs. It's the same animations from Heroes, so let's break it down here since we can actually play as him. As far as I can tell, there's 4 different phases to the build up to top speed. You've got the walk, the jog, the sprint, and the top speed animations. That intense lean that SA2 had when turning definitely would have helped here. Could be a huge factor in why people say Heroes has slippery controls. Also, there isn't any animation where Sonic throws his arms behind his back, which is pretty strange considering that pretty much all of the modern Sonic games have done it so far. Overall, Sonic Heroes uses a similar format to Sonic Adventures 1 and 2, but the posing and game feel are slightly worse, so I'm going to be putting this into the B tier. Sonic Riders, despite having characters on hoverboards, does have brief moments where characters can be on foot if you run out of air. So yes, we'll be judging the running animation from this game as well. These running animations have Sonic holding his hoverboard under his arm, so his posing is going to be slightly affected by it. As to whether that's a good or bad thing, I'm honestly not very sure. But there's nothing too crazy going on here. There's only 2 phases to it, with a jog and a top speed animation. These animations are pretty good even if it is just the 2. It's got a good amount of bounce at top speed, and the arm pump definitely adds to it. Let's be nice and put this one into the C tier. Time for another meme game. Sonic X on the Leapster reuses Sonic 3 sprites, which might sound pretty good on paper. And I gotta admit, this game has some unique sprites that actually look really cool. But none of them have anything to do with Sonic's running animation, so we don't care about those. Sonic never goes too fast in this game. He only has a single jogging animation for his movement, and because of the slower speed, the pacing is kinda weird. Despite this, and only because the sprite work and posing are ripped straight from Sonic 3, it at least has some merit to it. But the lack of complexity and bad pacing are gonna bog this all the way down to the D tier. Sonic Rush is another game developed by Dimps, so you know there's gonna be a lot of care put into the character's movement, even if it is on a handheld. There are 4 phases for build-up, which include the boost. Pretty impressive for a 3D handheld game. The walk and jog look almost identical though, making me wonder why they even chose to differentiate them. There's really amazing posing for the max speed animation, and everything else coming before is also pretty top-notch. Like the advanced games, Sonic is small and compact, which I feel always makes his running animations look really charming. The higher speeds this game has Sonic run at give him a good sense of nimbleness since his pacing fits so well. Honestly, this is giving me some big Sonic Adventure 1 vibes. Let's place this one into the A tier. Sonic 06 is not a game for the faint of heart. I'll actually put myself out there to defend a lot of things about this game, but the running animations are not one of them. Sonic has several phases to his run, similar to something like the adventure games, but the posing and game feel are just awful. His top speed animation has him fanning his hands, fingers stiffly pointed straight out. It just looks really awkward and overly rigid. Sonic is generally pretty slow in this game, so the animations never play too fast, making the pacing something to be desired. Then we have the mock speed sections, which have Sonic running at extreme speeds. Not a fan of this posing either. It's an even more exaggerated version of his top speed animation, with his hands fanning out even more somehow. Sonic 06's running animations have the complexity, but not really anything else going for it. I'm gonna have to put this one into the D tier. Sonic Rivals 1 and 2 are some pretty low-budget PSP games with animations to match. There's only a single animation that just lazily changes speed depending on how fast Sonic is going. The posing is pretty bad. It almost looks like a walk animation sped up to create the illusion that Sonic is running. Real talk, some of the games on the Saturn were better than this. We're throwing this one straight down into the F tier. Sonic and the Secret Rings gets a lot of hate, so do the running animations factor into any of that hate? Well, there's 3 phases of movement animations building up to max speed, a good amount of complexity. The posing is pretty good, but I gotta say, the pacing is kind of off because the animation speed is really slow. That is until it's too fast, and then Sonic bobs and sways left to right like a maniac. I think they definitely could have made use of a further top speed animation for these crazy speeds. This game also has you steer Sonic by tilting a Wiimote, so there's a bit of strafing to Sonic's movement animations that give it a weird feeling like he's gliding on ice. And needless to say, motion controls don't make for all that good of a game feel. All of this contributes to making it look a bit desync from what Sonic's movements look like they should actually be doing. I've been ragging on everything a lot, which is making it sound a bit worse than it actually is, so with all that being said, I'll cut it some slack and place it into the C tier. Sonic Rush Adventure, the sequel to Rush, and Sonic Colors DS share all of the same animations when it comes to Sonic running, except for one tiny detail: the direction Sonic's head is facing. So we'll be talking about both of them at the same time, but ranking them separately because yes, it does make a surprising amount of difference, and you'll see why in just a second. Even though both of these games follow the same build-up formula as the original Rush, all of the animations themselves are slightly different. In total, there are still 4 build-up phases, including the boost. Like the original, the walk and jog still look almost identical, again making me wonder why they even chose to differentiate them. The sprinting pose has a huge lean forward in it, really reminds me of Sonic Heroes. And honestly, this is pretty cool, it looks great from a side view perspective. Like I said, the direction Sonic's head is facing is slightly different between Sonic Rush Adventure and Colors DS. In Rush Adventure, Sonic's head tilts slightly downwards, and in Colors DS, it's looking straight forward. This causes a slight issue in the Colors DS animation because it makes his arms very noticeably clip through the side of his head. It also just makes it look like his arms are angled really high and it just doesn't look right. So because of this difference, we'll be putting the Sonic Rush Adventure running animations in the A tier, and the Colors DS animations in the B tier. Sonic Riders Zero Gravity, similar to the original Riders, also has some moments where Sonic runs on foot. These are different animations though, so let's go over them. Like the original, Sonic has 2 running phases, but in the second phase, he'll actually run with his arms thrown behind his back. And that's honestly it, not much else to go over. I still think it's an overall upgrade, so let's put this into the B tier. Sonic Unleashed has 2 versions of the game, the SD version for the Wii, and the HD version for the Xbox 360 and PS3. Their animations are very similar. Differences are pretty much negligible, so I'm going to be going over them together. There are 4 distinct build-up animation phases, including the boost, with great posing and a nice lean on the turning. But because you go so fast in these games, sometimes the animations look a bit too slow for how fast you're actually going. This causes the pacing of the animations to be slightly desynced from the actual movement. On top of that, I think the running looks a tiny bit too effortless, like Sonic is gliding on butter. Again, I like when Sonic looks like he's exerting at least a little bit of force when running. Maybe an unpopular opinion, but I really do think the animation is almost too smooth. Everything else is absolutely phenomenal though, so I'm still putting this one into the A tier. Sonic and the Black Knight is another game similar to Secret Rings. The game feel is already a huge step up because you use analog controls rather than motion controls to steer Sonic. We also gotta keep in mind, Sonic is holding a sword in his hand the entire time, so the animations themselves are all going to be slightly different. Similar to Secret Rings, there's 3 animation phases building up to top speed. There's a walk, a jog, and finally a top speed animation. These all seem more refined than the animations in Secret Rings. Overall, Black Knight is an upgrade over Secret Rings, and also, Sonic looks cool as hell running around with the sword, so I'm gonna put this one into the B tier. Modern Sonic's running animations in the next 2 boost games, Sonic Colors Wii and Sonic Generations for both 3DS and console, essentially have all the same animations from Unleashed with a few tweaks to the sprinting animation, the phase before boost. This splits the sprinting animation into 2 distinct sub-phases. One where Sonic's fingers are fanned out but more relaxed, a fine-looking animation, and a second phase where Sonic leans forward a tiny bit more and fans his fingers out more rigidly. It reminds me of the hand shape you'd find in a T-pose. You may remember in Sonic Unleashed that Sonic's arms were thrown back and his hands were balled into fists during his sprinting animation. But in Colors and Generations, he once again fans his fingers out while sprinting, very reminiscent of Sonic 06. I'm fine with the first phase since his fingers are a lot more relaxed, but that second phase doesn't really do it for me. For this reason, despite the extra complexity with the additional sprinting phase, I'm going to be placing these animations a tier lower than Unleashed at a B tier. Alright, so we talked about Generations already, but only modern Sonic's animations. Let's now talk about the second half of the gameplay with classic Sonic's animations. This will also include classic Sonic's animations from the 3DS version of Generations and Sonic Forces, since they're practically identical. The funny thing is, these are basically recreations of the classic trilogy animations, and they do a perfect job at recreating everything that was so great about the originals. We gave those a B tier, so honestly, I'm gonna put these in the same spot. Sonic Lost World's running animations are almost exactly the same as the previous boost games, with some added stylization around Sonic's feet that attempt to recreate that figure eight effect as seen in games like Sonic CD, but in a 3D environment. It works really well in the 2D side-scrolling sections, but I gotta say, from behind in 3D, not so much, because you can't really see it. Sonic also has a new top speed animation in place of the boost, since it wasn't included in this game. I'm actually a pretty big fan of it, and luckily we'll be seeing something heavily resembling it in the future. Overall, the added stylization was a neat idea, but only really looks great half the time. There's definitely both good and bad here compared to the previous games, so I'm gonna say it evens out and keeps itself in the B tier. Lost World 3DS attempts to recreate the animations from the console version on a lower poly Sonic. For the most part, it does what it needs to. However, there are many animations missing from the console version, specifically the second phase of his sprint and the top speed animation. On the bright side, because it's lower poly, Sonic's hands are always balled up into fists so he doesn't fan his hands out when running. The 3DS version of this game is Lost World on console, but slightly downgraded, so I'm gonna put this into the tier below at the C tier. Sonic Boom Rise of Lyric has recently been praised in retrospect for its animations. And I agree, this game has great animations when it comes to things like facial expressions and simple gestures during cutscenes. But when it comes to the running animations, I'm sorry, but I'm just not a fan. In this game, Sonic has a walk, 2 jogs varying in speed, and then a sprint and top speed animation during certain scripted sections of the game. Meaning, during 90% of regular gameplay, you won't be going any faster than a simple jog. And that really doesn't do a great job at giving that trademarked Sonic game feel. When Sonic is in these limited scripted sections, like these Mach Speed sections, his sprint and top speed animations are what you'll be seeing. Again, it's got the fan fingers and it's very reminiscent of Sonic 06, but with way too much squash and stretch. You always hear that squash and stretch is a good thing, but yes, there is such a thing as too much. It makes it look like Sonic's bones are made out of jello or something. Sonic Boom Rise of Lyric is a strange game with very strange running animations, and that is why I'm putting it into the D tier. Sonic Boom also had some handheld games on the 3DS, Shattered Crystal and Fire and Ice. These games share the same running animation, so let's talk about both of them together. There are only 2 distinct animations when it comes to Sonic's running. Kinda like the classics, you got the jog and the top speed animation. They both heavily resemble the console version, but the top speed animation is actually a pretty decent upgrade. Because the game is fixed at a 2D angle, they were able to fine-tune the pose to look perfect from the side. It's a step up from Rise of Lyric, but the lack of build-up animations and a very average-looking jog animation prevent it from being excellent, so I'm gonna put this one into the C tier. Let's go back to the classics again with Sonic Mania. Using the classics as a basis, Sonic Mania takes the best aspects of each game. The jogging and top speed animation from the original trilogy, and the peel out from CD. On top of this, all of Sonic's running animations have double the amount of frames, leading to sprite animations twice as smooth as the original. Sonic also has completely new sprites, so the devs not only created new in-betweens for each frame of Sonic's original animations, but they also revamped all of the original sprites in the new art style. All of these changes and improvements bundled together truly ascend the animations of the original into the highest tier, so let's place this one into the coveted S tier. We aren't done talking about Sonic Mania just yet. Sonic Mania uses a low poly 3D Sonic for its special stages, complete with running animations. So how does it compare to its Sega Saturn counterparts, since these graphics were based on that era? Well, it's got 2 phases to its running animation, so we're already off to a better start than Sonic R. The pacing is really great too. I really feel like Sonic's rhythm to his run matches how fast he's actually going. I just feel like the posing for his jogging animation specifically isn't as great as something like Sonic 3D Blast's special stages. And this is the animation you're probably going to be seeing for 90% of the special stage, since you can't activate top speed until Mach 3. But one thing these animations have that the others don't is how Sonic leans into his turns. All positives and negatives considered, I'd say this unfortunately isn't on the same level as the special stages for 3D Blast or Sonic Jam, so let's put this into the C tier. And finally, let's talk about the latest 2 games, Sonic Forces and Frontiers, which share the same animations for Sonic's movement. These 2 share the same walking and jogging animations from the Boost games before it, and the same top speed animation introduced in Lost World with the posing slightly modified. It's the sprint animation that gets a revamp once more. Split again into 2 sub-phases, phase 1 of the sprint has Sonic's hands fanned out, slightly relaxed, same as before. But instead of phase 2 making his fingers fan out more rigidly like in Colors and Generations, these games actually do the opposite and relax them even more. They're almost in this half-closed, half-open state, and like I've been saying, I'm way more of a fan than this than when they fan out all rigid-like. It's a good change, a really small one, but just enough of an improvement to put this at a higher tier than Colors and Generations. This one is going into the A tier. And there we have it, every single Sonic running animation properly ranked. There are so many literal moving parts that go into a good running animation, and there's so many good ones that go about it in very different ways. It just shows how flexible Sonic's stylization has room to be from game to game. Out of all of Sonic's animations, the running sequence probably has to be the most important one. After all, the character is synonymous with speed, and the best way to convey speed is with a strong looking run. Anyways, that's gonna be it for today's video. If you liked it, leave a like and subscribe for even more way past cool Sonic content such as this. I wanna know what your tier list looks like. I'll leave the link to the tier list in the description, so if you end up making one, be sure to join our Discord server and share it. Anyways, thank you to my amazing channel members. And with all that being said, I hope everyone has a fantastic day. Peace.